Hello and welcome to another one in our series, Breaking Down Barriers. My name is Chris Igwe and I share with you some insights in a short video, basically inspired and contributed around my book, Breaking Down Barriers, my journey from a small African village to the world stage. And in this book, I take through different chapters, I share with you some thoughts and insights and hopefully give you some inspiration with regard to your own life and where you are going. So what do we want to talk about today? Well, I think this is one of the most powerful connection pieces that one can have with anybody that we interact with, whether it is physically or whether it is through some sort of phone call or Zoom or Teams or anything else in whatever platform. But equally, of course, it can be through the back curtain, as it were, of social media. You can still connect through this particular topic and this particular item. So social media in terms of being more connected and connective as opposed to hiding behind the curtain and obviously making inappropriate comments or messages to people, which sadly social media has done. But I don't want to dwell on that. What I want to talk about is this particular topic, which I entitle Tell Your Story. Tell your story, because at the end of the day, as human beings, whether you are an introvert or an extrovert, so whether you keep it all inside you or you are very happy to and gregarious and loud and sharing lots of things in the way you tell your story, but both types of individuals can very easily A, tell their story, and B, tell it powerfully. Now, why do I say that? Well, on the one hand, because the idea of telling stories, some of which can be very painful and very difficult, it may be not so easy to share that story. But when in the right environment, we can actually help by connecting with people, because what we need to do as human beings is create greater and better and more effective connectivity between us. So in my chapter, I'll just read a few paragraphs because I think they really express what it is we need to consider. Well, first of all, I say that we all have a story within us. Some people may say, well, I've got no story to tell. I'm not interesting. My life's not been interesting. Well, I can assure you that it is. It just depends on who wants to hear it and how you tell that story and when you tell that story, of course. Some stories are too painful to tell, so we need the right situation in which we can feel safe. Feel safe. It's very important, especially those who've gone through very difficult situations. But stories are a mosaic of our life, of our past, essentially. There may be more difficult moments. There may be more joyous moments. There may be more difficult times. There may be more joyous times. But whatever it is, they create a pathway through your life. Stories bring people together. It could be a one-on-one conversation, or it could be in a wider group, depending on how you feel about it. But there are few beautiful moments that I know of than when you actually connect with somebody through your story. And I say this because you've probably equally experienced, I remember especially at university back in the days of discos and clubbing and everything else with my friends and of course later on into life, but you would be in a party. Now, do you remember those parties where you'd find somebody or meet up with somebody who you didn't know and you ended up in a conversation? And one of the most incredible things that I found, which actually attracted me to this idea of hearing other people's stories and letting them tell their stories, is that I was not a great one for talking. I was more of a listener. I still am today. I enjoy listening more than I do talking, despite what people might think. And you would be there in that party, and maybe that poor person has nobody else to connect with and they feel lonely. They're out of place as well, because if you remember, all these parties would kind of bring and buy and share, and you didn't know who everybody was anyway. You just hosted the party in your place or somebody else did. And you would sit there or stand there and you'd be talking to this person. And this person would just talk and talk and talk and share. And I would just listen. And I enjoyed listening. I enjoyed hearing their story. And they would end up, maybe later on, somehow the information would get back to you that they had the most amazing party. It was just a fantastic evening. And yet they didn't talk to anybody else. They only talked to you, or to me in this case. They didn't dance. They didn't drink much. So how could they have had such an amazing party? It was because there was a connection that was made. I was listening to them and listening intently. And I guess that's where my joy and fun of listening, and I'd love to go to discos, I'd love to go to parties, but I'd end up talking or listening all the time. So rather than getting involved in all sorts of strange and inappropriate things, I would be listening to people's stories. And I think that's where my enjoyment of it and my skill actually perfected itself, of listening. In a similar way, flip side is, of course, where you are talking, and I learned this equally, is where I'm telling my story and I realize the person is not listening. The person's eyes are wandering to see who else is more interesting or fascinating. They don't care about your story. They're not interested in you. They've come there for other reasons. And that's where I would just stop. I wouldn't talk anymore. I would then either politely thank them, move on, go somewhere else. But if someone is not connecting with you, and you can tell that that is not the case, there is no point telling your story, because we all have to treasure and value each other's stories. At a different level, a few days ago, I was watching the television, and there was this particular program about a lady in the beauty sector. And it was just fascinating to hear her story, how she has been very successful, become very successful, has tens of millions of followers, and yet has these different challenges that we all live through every day. And to just hear her for that 25 minutes of that interview, that story. And I was so compelled that I sent a message via Instagram. She may never read it, she may never see it, but I just felt I had to tell her that that story that she shared was incredibly powerful. She was vulnerable, but she was also authentic. She was herself. We all have incredible stories. You don't have to be someone who's got 54 or 80 million or 100 million followers, whatever it happens to be. This jumper that I'm wearing, which is designed and created by a lady called Larissa, who has created a company called T7 Berlin, T7 Berlin. And I had the privilege, along with a colleague of mine, of being one of the mentors in this particular program, the Mapping Academy to be precise, and helping her understand the kind of retail aspects. It's zero waste, no plastics, and she's building this small business. Her story is fascinating as well. We all have a story. There's always something to tell. So 3D knitwear, I hope that it becomes really successful for her in her story and in her journey. So the stories themselves, they create this bond between us and other people. But you've got to treasure, on the one hand, the hearing of the story, and on the other hand, the delivering of the story to someone else. But yes, tell your story, but be prepared to listen to the story. In my book, and I'll just use this quote by Helen Keller because I like quotes. The best and most beautiful things in the world cannot be seen or even touched. They must be felt in the heart. The best and most beautiful things in the world cannot be seen or even touched. They must be felt in the heart. And then in this story, because what I do in each of my chapters is I give you a context, an idea, a thought, and then I give you my own personal experience. And in the book, although, of course, because it's for ages 8 to 80 or whatever, that particular story was an interesting one, a poignant one in many ways. But clearly there's only so much that I have or would include in the book. Long story short, I ended up in a brothel. The company that took us there with my colleagues, they had just won a big contract. They were so excited. Don't ask me the beginning. I'll know the beginning of the story, but don't ask me how I got there. I do remember I was totally I hadn't drunk, let's put it that way. So it was all clear. But they took us to this place where they felt we should celebrate. Ended up in this brothel, and whilst I didn't realize, and none of us did initially, what we were going there for, or where we were going. But once we got there, one thing that fascinated me, and of course, nothing happened as far as I was concerned anyway. So I entered into this conversation with this American lady who had fallen pregnant as a result of being involved with somebody in the army. And whilst being a prostitute was not what she wanted, she was actually looking to raise enough cash to be able to take, at that time, her 6-year-old son back to the United States and create a life of her own and for herself. Now, for me, when you get close to someone like that, albeit for a brief number of hours, but you focus on that person. And believe me, as you can imagine, being in a brothel, you don't need me to describe what that looks like. It's really key that you keep your eyes focused on the other person's eyes. You cannot allow your eyes to wander. I was in a place I didn't want to be, and I was in a place where I could not escape anyway, because they had driven us there, minibus and whatever, so there was no way I could have left. So I thought, well, profit from this moment, at least by engaging in a conversation with this lady. And so the idea of focusing on her eyes, of course, meant that my eyes could not and did not wander. But trust me, it's very hard to keep your eyes focused for a few hours. But I managed it, and that honed my skill, a different skill that I have, by the way, in order to be able to focus on the other person. Her story was powerful. Her story was sad, but I could see where she wanted to go. And she was so grateful for that conversation with me that she gave me a big hug, of course, before leaving. And there's another part to the story which I won't bore you with, but it was nice to be able to connect with her in that situation. So tell your story and allow others to tell you their story. But to be able to hear the story, you have to be in the zone. You have to be in that place. You have to be focused. And sometimes it can take a few minutes. Sometimes it can take a few hours. It's a skill that you need to develop. And by developing it, you make someone's life better and happier. And quite frankly, it helps you as well. It's a very powerful thing to be able to achieve. So please feel free to explore that for yourself. Start to listen to other people's stories. The introvert, you're going to have to drag it out of them more over more time, if you like. The extrovert, you then have to stop them from being a little too gregarious and outgoing. But again, don't shut them down. Just listen. Develop that skill, because everybody has a story to tell. Some are more painful, more powerful than others, but nonetheless, we all need to be connected. And by connecting through stories is a very powerful mechanism, technique, if you like, but also just a way to live. So I hope this has left you with some ideas, resonated, and please feel free to tell me how you deal with stories, how you engage with other people with stories. And of course, if there are any other ways in which you have tried or used or strategized around stories, then I'd love to know more about it. In the meantime, I wish you very well, and I look forward to connecting with you again very soon. Thank you.